You're listening to the Pharmacy Podcast Network.
If you or your patients struggle with muscle cramps, spasms, soreness, or restless leg syndrome, you're going to want to hear about our non-opioid TheraWorks Relief. TheraWorks Relief is a clinically proven and published locally acting topical solution that prevents and relieves muscle cramps, spasms, and soreness in the legs and feet. In a research study including patients diagnosed with restless leg syndrome, TheraWorks Relief was shown to reduce symptoms commonly associated with accompanying RLS, including muscle cramps and spasms. Muscle cramps are reported as a side effect of hundreds of prescription medications, from intravenous iron sucrose and conjugated estrogens to statins and diuretics. By managing muscle cramps, TheraWorks Relief supports adherence, helping patients stay on important and often life-saving medications. TheraWorks Relief comes in an easy-to-use, fast-absorbing, non-greasy foam that can prevent muscle cramps and spasms with just a few simple applications a day. To learn more about TheraWorks Relief, go to theraworksrelief.com and click on the healthcare professional link.
Hey everyone, this is Zoe Berry. I'm the founder and CEO of ZappRx, and you're listening to the Pharmacy Podcast Network.
Pharmacy Podcast Network. This is the founder and host of the Pharmacy Podcast today, Todd Urey. Excited about today's show. Everyone knows who listens to this network. 24 podcasts, 34 PharmDs participating, several national associations. We are growing. We're tipping over 70,000 listeners. I'm so excited, and it's all because of you, listeners. If you're driving in your car, jogging, working out, keep your hands on the wheel, keep focused on your workout. This is all for you. We are the biggest fans of pharmacy and pharmacists. We need your suggestions. If there's anything that you'd like to hear about, please tweet us or send us an email. Tweet us at Pharmacy Podcast. We're on Instagram at Pharmacy Podcast, or send us an email, publisher at pharmacypodcast.com. I have an extremely special guest, and I should say guests, because I have been after an interview because of our busy lives. We weren't able to get here sooner, but better late than never. An incredible powder keg of not only entrepreneurial spirit, but really in the heart of healthcare, of what it is to be patient-centric and why this person is patient-centric. You will hear upcoming in this interview. But without further ado, I would like to welcome the ZappRx team to the Pharmacy Podcast Network for the first time. Karen Tarazi and Zoe Berry, welcome to the Pharmacy Podcast.
Hey Todd, thanks so much for having us. We are really excited to be at the Pharmacy Podcast Network for the first time ever. So thank you so much for hosting us, and excited to jump in and share more about ZappRx and obviously get the word out to all of your listeners.
I was excited to have you on. I've been watching what ZappRx has been doing for about 2.5 years now, and realized that it's become much more than what it started out to be. From a technological perspective, integration into other pharmacy management systems. But really the heart, as I said in the beginning, the heart of healthcare is really about the patient. That's the entire reason that ZappRx was invented from the beginning. And with that, I want Zoe to just tell a little bit about yourself for the listeners who do know you and don't know about ZappRx. Let's set the stage before we get into this interview.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Todd. So ZappRx was really founded based on a personal experience that I had with my family, where one of my family members was diagnosed with a severe disease and required specialty medication. And, we were just general consumers or patients at that point and really didn't know what it meant to need a specialty drug. And unfortunately, it took over 6 months for my family member to get access to this key life-saving, life-altering medication. And in that 6-month process that we were waiting, you went through the phone tree of hell, calling multiple stakeholders, whether it was the doctor, the pharmacy, or the payer/PBM, really trying to understand where this drug was and what the quote issue was, and getting this family member on therapy. And what was worse is not only going through that opacity and frustration, but watching that family member deteriorate. And unfortunately, it wasn't until this family member was at risk for an event so severe that he would have spent the rest of his life in a wheelchair with permanent neurological damage that we finally got access to this medication. And I'll say that the medication really was a lifesaver and really was life-altering, because my family member was able to make just about a full recovery and now leads a very healthy, fulfilled life, still on medication, but has really managed his disease, and I'd say is, just about out of it at this point, which is so exciting to share. And having gone through that process, I was working on Wall Street at the time, and I saw all these rules and regulations that were changing healthcare and coming down the pike or promising to change healthcare. But in studying them more, and I often joke that I became, quote, prescription obsessed, I realized that specialty drugs as a category was going to get left behind. And, I really thought about what my family went through and what my family member went through. And I decided to found ZappRx with the mission of making it better, faster, and more transparent for all stakeholders to coordinate for specialty medications and really put the patient first and ensure that patients got on the right medications they needed in the most timely manner possible.
Karen, as someone who's joined the team, the ZappRx team, I understand leading with passion, as Zoe started this company with passion to really facilitate and create a solution where she saw an issue and a problem that was being experienced by thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people, not even in the world, but just the country. But someone who's business-driven and business-oriented, before I have a question for you, I do want you to set the stage for the listeners, just giving a little bit on your background. And then I actually have a question about the business of pharmacy and how ZappRx fits into it.
Thanks, Todd. Karen Tarazi, I've been with ZappRx for 3 years now, and my background really breaks into two halves. I started as a social worker, actually. So I have an MSW, and I worked at large academic medical centers here in Boston. So for me, everything that I did after that, going to the business side of the world, which I've been in now for about 17 years, has to have been connected to something really mission-driven that I could connect back to the patients that I worked with or the care team members that I worked alongside of when I was a social worker. So that core piece of the business side is very important to me. And so I worked for several healthcare IT startups and nonprofits actually since leaving social work. So the mission side is very connected here for me. Obviously, just heard Zoe's story. And then with my social work background, that's just core to anything I do going forward.
So Karen, first question is, I happen to always want to categorize providers of technology. And I always, for the last 2.5 years, of never getting an opportunity to talk because of just timing and how busy we all are. But it's so much fun to have you on the show. I've always categorized ZappRx in the specialty space, but is that the only position or place that ZappRx plays within the 5 sectors of pharmacy? Or tell me more about that.
Yeah, sure. So specialty is it's a broad term, and it impacts so many different stakeholders. So while maybe it sounds narrow, we are working with providers who treat all sorts of diseases, including rare diseases and then some more larger diseases. So it's not just specialty that our providers are treating, though we are at this point in fairly large academic medical centers, and since we started in rare disease areas, a lot of our providers are specialized. I will say, though, that because we touch so many different corners of the industry, the providers, the specialty pharmacies, the payers and PBMs, and the biopharma companies, ultimately, it feels like the impact that we could have is pretty broad, even within that focused area of specialty.
So Zoe, tell me a little bit about the platform and integration into pharmacy management systems. We're always, of course, sensitive to the patient need. However, we also understand in order to use a technology platform, it's got to be easy for the provider to actually tap into it. So the coordination between the physician signing off on the prescription and then moving towards a pharmacy, connecting with the manufacturer of the actual medication, back to the insurer, there's rebates involved. Kind of give us an oversight on the platform itself.
Perfect. So I like to say that the big, hairy, audacious goal for ZappRx is to have one single platform to coordinate specialty care, which is a really, aggressive goal to go after. So it's all about where you start and then how you starburst out to the network. With ZappRx, we started on the provider side, so we built a provider-facing tool, and we built in all the 4 major steps that it takes to get a specialty drug prescribed. So benefit verification, prior authorization, enrollment forms, and patient consent. All those 4 things are tools that are available on the provider side, and then from there we began building out connections to the other stakeholders. Our next stakeholder that we partnered with were specialty pharmacies, and we started by sending clean and accurate enrollment forms. We heard from one of the largest pharmacy players in the market that in the current model without ZappRx, which is a very forms-driven and manual process for specialty, it takes 12 touches over 5 days just to get the enrollment form to be accurate. That's because information comes in missing, incomplete, inaccurate. I think this is probably something you've lived or that your listeners have lived, and it's really frustrating. So just by sending clean and accurate enrollment forms, we started adding value immediately to pharmacies. And then from there, we actually had one of the really large specialty pharmacies in the U.S. come to us and seek a deeper partnership where we would actually integrate ZappRx's software into their back end and basically turn off the fax machine. And that's a motto we have at ZappRx, turn off the fax. And by doing that, you get an ability to really reduce the operational cost and the inefficiencies that is associated with receiving a fax and then manually typing it into a pharmacy management system. But what's really interesting is from there, and this is where the goal is, to be the bleeding edge of technology and innovation in healthcare, pharmacies can return status update back to the providers. And so you can understand if there's more information that's necessary on a single prescription, or you can really dive deeper into the status of that prescription. So we often joke we're creating that Domino's pizza tracker for your $100,000 life-saving medication. And I'll stop there because I can go on and on about ZappRx's features and capabilities, but just right there, creating that electronic bridge between the providers and the pharmacies to drive value has been really important. And a key statistic on that is that we've actually been able to cut fulfillment in a specialty area in pulmonology from 6 weeks, which was what the average was, down to 6 days. And our mission is to get patients on paid therapy in under 24 hours.
That's incredible. Karen, when I entered the space of pharmacy, it was an institutional pharmacy. This would have been in 2004, and a pre-authorization was like nails on the chalkboard for the pharmacy operational team that really wanted to keep things flowing in the workflow category. So therefore, there were 2 workflows. There was one workflow for those static meds that were constantly being produced, those daily meds that were kind of part of a regimen, and then the specialty meds, not in the sense of being specialty per se, but something out of the box, was handled by an elite group of 2 to 4 pharm techs and a pharmacist to really do nothing but stay on the phone, stand by the 6 or 8 fax machines, all pushing papers out and authorizations out just to get the physician and the insurer to basically sign off on this. So from your perspective in being a team member of this, can you give our listeners kind of a range between where we were and where we are today with the incredible technology of ZappRx?
Yeah, sure. I'm thinking immediately back to the first clinic that started with ZappRx, and 2 of the nurses were really spending an inordinate amount of their time on this process, and their system if you call it that, at that time, was they had 4 different piles of paper on one of their desks. And when they moved from sort of one stage to the other in the PA process, they would literally move the paper from one stack to the next on the desk.
Yeah.
And so that stack is gone. I think there are other pieces of paper on that desk when we go there now. It's not exactly clean, but you definitely see the change in that all of the things that they used to keep track of manually, and in that instance, literally on a desk. But we've seen all sorts of variations of that similar theme, where there's a file cabinet where they move it from one folder to the other, or the most organized staff might have a whiteboard with check boxes next to the steps that they've completed. And that all happens, of course, because this is not all digital, and the information that are required to get this patient on therapy exists in multiple different systems. So they had to be innovative in their own right in terms of how they kept track of all of this to get the patient on therapy. So there's a lot of physicalness to it in terms of the papers, and hadn't really come that far from what you described back in 2004 about standing around the fax machine and manning it to make sure that you didn't miss something.
Right.
Something like a request for more information, maybe from a particular pharmacist.
Exactly. It's exactly what I'm talking about. It was so frustrating and so tedious. And that's part of why I get excited about technology being able to accelerate the mundane processes that keep care providers from really caring for the patient or looking for other ways of helping that patient rather than paperwork. So that's very cool. Zoe, I, as I said at the beginning of the interview, really excited to get you on the show and have really wanted to interview you because you're an innovator. When I think of you, and I've seen your picture and I've read your articles and I know a little bit about you. Can't wait to meet you someday. We got to get together at some national conference. But I'm wondering, so you're very entrepreneurial. You're also extremely innovative. As a younger entrepreneurial type that just came out naturally, you made money on balloon animals, for goodness sakes, which is just amazing story. And my first entrepreneurial attempt was teaching kids how to swim, and I created my very first company unofficially called Sink or Swim. And a couple parents made comments about it being a little dark, but I was like, well, that's what you got to do. You either got to sink or swim. Now give me $5. But when I think of you, you think of the innovation side of who you are. The very first thing I think of is I was invited to come to the Convergence blockchain conference happening at Cambridge University. And blockchain, with the acceleration of information from different sources and then the verification of it, where do you see blockchain going with regards to the technology that ZappRx provides to a pharmacy, a provider, a pharmacist?
Yeah, so it's such an interesting question. One of my really great peers has actually been instrumental in building a company in that space, doing a lot of the blockchain work. And she and I have had multiple conversations of how do you bring that incredibly epic technology to healthcare? And we are really working very hard to figure out how to bring blockchain in. I will say that there's this dream versus reality in healthcare, and where ZappRx is today is already so far ahead of the stack of papers that Karen mentioned and that you described, and we're trying to solve that problem first and foremost. But as we get more traction on the integrations with really large players in this space, that's where you have the potential to leapfrog across, how do you turn off the fax machine? How do you integrate into, how do you do more sophisticated work with technology like blockchain? How do you make this process go faster and faster? And I will say there are some very innovative players that are coming to healthcare. And so I think there's this excitement around some of those players. Obviously, Amazon buying PillPack is a really big move. I think it's going to force players to be more innovative overall. And I think the standard of it's okay, it's a fax machine, or, HIPAA, I can't modernize, I can't do something innovative because I'm not sure if that's okay under HIPAA. It's going to become, cheaper and cheaper excuses, and you're going to have to do something more and more modern. So do I think blockchain will happen in the short term? I think if it's, in the next 3 years, I think you'll start to see it cropping up. But I do think that there's going to be some work that's going to be done before blockchain can actually take effect in healthcare.
I absolutely agree. I think there's some vetting that needs to take place. However, the excitement for me is the vetting of that data and that information to find the single sources of the information. And when I think of single sources in what we're talking about today in reference to ZappRx is the patient, the physician, the manufacturer, the coordination of care, the insurer. And if we all had the acceleration and verification of information, I can just imagine that your 24-hour period might be dropped down to hours. So that will be really exciting to watch.
Yes, we are very keen to get patients on therapy as quickly as possible. And we sort of often joke internally, don't you wish that specialty could be, as seamless as retail, where you call the doctor, an hour later you swing by the pharmacy and your drug's ready to be picked up, or an hour later you have your drug in your hands and you can start your medication. Maybe that'll start happening. Specialties typically mail ordered. Maybe there will be specialty drones flying around. For same-day delivery. That would be really cool.
I foresee that. I think it's not going to be science fiction pretty soon. So yes, I agree with you. I'd like to shift gears. I'd like to ask both of you a question. I'm going to start with you, Zoe. So we just celebrated for the very first time the first Women in Pharmacy Day, which was October 12th. And of course, October is also Pharmacist Month. So we're really doubling up on that theme of appreciating pharmacists as a true healthcare provider and somebody very, very important to better healthcare. But I want to step back to the women in pharmacy aspect, and that is, you're a woman, you're an entrepreneur. What's it mean to you to finally have focus from multiple sectors of business in general, of healthcare, but then also having the ability to not feel different between being a woman or being a man, but being a leader in healthcare? And how has that affected your life in being a professional and a leader as being a woman in a day and age where things are really accelerating and things are finally getting to the point where it should have been long ago with regards to equality? But just give your feedback on being a woman in healthcare today.
Absolutely. I mean, it has come so far from 2012 when I founded the company. I really do feel like I walk into a room and people are going to pay attention and take the concepts that I lay down seriously and really look to partner. It no longer feels like I'm a little girl with a little idea on a little cocktail napkin that's, going nowhere. I used to joke that I thought healthcare in general, no offense is going to be meant by this, but I used to joke that healthcare suffered from old male doctor syndrome, where if you weren't old and male or a doctor, no one took you seriously. And maybe that's different in the pharmacy world. But it's certainly what I experienced, both in the healthcare world, both in terms of having a concept and a product that doctors would use, going into biopharma or into the payers, and really very acutely on the investor side, which is also, heavily male dominated. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with these statistics around women in entrepreneurship, but only 3% of capital that is deployed every year in the venture capital world actually goes to women-led companies. So there's, hundreds of millions of, if not billions of dollars, only 3% go to women-led companies.
Well, I need that to change. I have 4 daughters, and I'm called a man-ambassador of the Women's in Pharmacy group. So I'm a huge advocate, and I'm banging on the gong to get as many people to pay attention. It's funny because there's a sweet spot in healthcare for women, and that happens to be pharmacy, because 52% of all registered active pharmacists throughout the United States are in fact women. So the women-led organizations are becoming more and more so, which I stand up and cheer, because I hope when I'm in my retirement, one of my 4 daughters can also be entrepreneurial, if not four out of 4, and take care of their old man.
Well, Todd, that really resonates, and I was going to guess that you had daughters, because I found an interesting statistic myself in building ZappRx. On the investor side, when I meet with investors, and obviously there's this very different statistic, 3% versus 52%, from my venture-backed startup world to the pharmacy world. But what I found is that the investors that have backed ZappRx, 100% of all the venture firms where I've gotten a term sheet and they've actually wired, 100% of the partners who have led those deals have daughters. And when I ask them, what they want their daughters to be when they grow up, they never say, I want my daughter to be an investor. They always say, I want my daughter to be an entrepreneur. I want her to have an opportunity to found a company and build a company. And I'm backing you and I'm betting on you, because I believe that you're going to, break down a lot of barriers and roadblocks and pave a path forward. And I believe my daughter will be able to be an entrepreneur in the future.
That's absolutely beautiful. I love hearing that story, because that's meaningful and it's encouraging. My daughter, Rachel, is 9 years old, and she's most like her dad, and she actually has her own podcast. It's called Random Rachel.
Wow.
And she's just so funny, and she does things with humor. But I love hearing that, Zoe, because I believe that the world needs to change faster than it's changing, even though, I'm kind of in the pharmacy land where I put a silo around myself in other facets of business where women still aren't getting the chances that they deserve based on not being women, but just being qualified. And in the woman side of it all, or being female side of it all, seems to sometimes be a hang up for some people. But that is surely going to disintegrate faster than the progression of blockchain technology. But regardless, we're very hopeful. I want to say to Karen, having the ability to tap into a company that's forward thinking in healthcare and helping people must be very special to you. So what's your thoughts of the future for ZappRx, Karen?
Oh, I think that we're really going to bring transparency to this challenge that is, in so many dark, different corners. And with the relationships we've been able to strike so far, you can really see that starting to germinate. So Zoe mentioned that we have, a large specialty pharmacy, who's connected with us in our network. We had another one sign up last month. We announced our partnership with Gunmeadow. And so I think that if we do turn this into a nice series together, you're going to hear about a lot of other partnerships being struck beyond specialty pharmacy, really with the manufacturers and the payers as well. Really, everybody wants for the patient to get on the right drug, the drug that's intended by the prescriber, as quickly as possible. And, we're trying to do the difficult thing, which is attack something from a systematic level, from a systemic level. We're not trying to push just our app out there. We're really trying to change the way these stakeholders interact with each other and take away a lot of the redundancy, a lot of the administrative headache. And really everybody wins in that scenario. And that's a difficult message to get out there. It's taken us some time, but I think that the roots are really starting to take hold, and this is going to bear fruit with that.
So I am a huge Pittsburgh fan and Pittsburgh guy. I can't help it because that's where I'm from. And I have a special place in my heart for Boston just because the two cities are very similar in personality and grit. And I was disappointed, Zoe, that you didn't come on with a Bostonian accent.
I'm sorry to disappoint you there, Todd. I actually grew up in New York City, but I don't have a New York accent either, at least not that I'm aware of.
That's right. I was waiting for you to say something like, top of the morning to you, come on down from Gloucester and meet up with us on top of the hub. That's my favorite restaurant, by the way, in Boston, is Top of the Hub. If anyone listening has ever been there, it is the most beautiful overlook of Boston. It is just absolutely amazing. So we're going to have to meet up there at some time, Zoe.
Absolutely. I would love to buy you a drink, Todd. Get some good Boston views in.
Exactly. So I want to thank you, Karen and Zoe, for being part of the Pharmacy Podcast. Now you're in the inner circle, by the way, so you'll be able to definitely come back and share some additional insights. I'd also like to get some physicians involved in really explaining and being part of our discussion to give their perspective of the acceleration of care by not being held up by the obstacles of paperwork and minutia and PBMs and things that are coming into play that's stopping healthcare from actually proceeding and progressing. But I wanted to just, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much, Zoe, for making time to be an interviewee on the Pharmacy Podcast. And as I said, you're going to be welcome back very soon.
Awesome. Well, Todd, thank you so much. I'm really excited to build this rapport, and I can't wait for the second time around.
Thank you. You were listening to the Pharmacy Podcast with Zoe Barry from ZappRx, and you can find more information about them at ZappRx.com. And look down into the show notes, and you'll have more additional information. Don't do it now if you're driving. And like we said, thank you so much to our listeners, making us the #1 podcast in healthcare about the business and professional pharmacy. And you can find all of our episodes at pharmacypodcast.com.